Under the searing sun of Balochistan, Sheetal and Zarek arrived at the designated meeting point, a patch of dry, barren earth surrounded by silence and wind. There were no signs of hospitality or discussion, no banners of reconciliation. What awaited them instead were 19 men standing in rigid formation. Some held rifles. All carried judgment. The land, stripped of shade and sympathy, bore witness to what would soon unfold. Sheetal wore her mother's shawl, wrapped tightly around her shoulders. In her hands, she held the Quran, close to her chest, steady and unshaken. The cloth she wore and the book she carried were more than symbols of tradition. They were her armor, her dignity, and her final appeal to conscience. As she stood beside Zarek, the tension in the air was palpable. Among the 19 were faces they both recognized, cousins, uncles, and neighbors. Men who had once celebrated Eid under the same roofs, shared meals, and exchanged laughter. Zarek scanned the group and asked, "Where is the Jirga?" His voice, though calm, wavered slightly. One elder stepped forward. "It's already decided," he said flatly. With those 4 words, the illusion of reconciliation shattered. This was not a dialogue, it was an execution staged under the guise of tradition. Sheetal stepped ahead. Her eyes scanned the assembly, not in fear, but in clarity. She lifted the Quran slightly and said, "You are only permitted to shoot." Her voice was steady, her tone deliberate. There were no cries, no pleas, only resolve. The shots rang out. 9 bullets tore through her body. As she collapsed, the Quran slipped from her grip, landing softly on the dust now stained red. Then came Zarek's turn. The gunfire intensified. He was shot more times than her, as if his role in loving her demanded harsher punishment. When it ended, no one mourned. The men turned, mounted their vehicles, and disappeared into the desert. Sheetal's final walk, carried out in absolute silence, left behind more than bodies. It left a scar on justice. It was not just murder. It was a ritual, one disguised as honor. One remembered not for screams, but for the stillness that followed. Sheetal was just 24. Young, spirited, and unwavering, she carried within her a quiet strength that defied the silence expected of women in her village. She did not seek attention or confrontation, only the basic right to choose her own life, her own love. In the mountainous tribal belt of Balochistan, this desire alone was considered rebellion. Raised in a society where tradition ruled more fiercely than law, Sheetal's world was bound by the decisions of the Jirga, a council of elders whose word carried more weight than the constitution. In her village, honor was not a personal trait, but a public currency, measured in obedience, silence, and sacrifice. For women, especially, any deviation from these unwritten codes invited punishment masked as justice. Yet Sheetal dared to dream. She dared to hope for a life that was hers alone. Her decision to marry Zarek, a man she loved deeply, was not a loud act of defiance. It was a quiet declaration of selfhood. But even that was too much in a place where love without permission was a crime, and forgiveness without vengeance was unthinkable. A woman who stood for choice in a world built on submission. Her bravery did not lie in confrontation but in her calm insistence on living freely. She knew the risks. She understood the cost. Still, she chose love. In doing so, Sheetal challenged not just her family or village, but an entire system sustained by fear and false notions of honor. Her voice, though soft, became a threat. And when it was silenced, it left behind an echo too loud to ignore. Sheetal did not shout, but her silence, in the end, spoke louder than anything else. Zarek was 32. A gentle soul with a kind heart, he loved Sheetal with a sincerity that was rare in a world where emotions were often buried beneath custom. Their love was not loud, not boastful. It was quiet, resilient, and true. But in their village, love without approval was not just frowned upon. It was condemned. When they chose to marry in secret, it was not an act of rebellion. It was a choice made out of desperation and hope. They believed that love, in its purest form, might be enough. But their marriage defied tribal expectations and challenged deeply rooted norms. When they later sought forgiveness, their courage was met not with compassion, but rejection. The doors they knocked on remained closed. The hearts they appealed to remained hardened. What followed was a life in hiding. Sheetal and Zarek moved constantly from village to village, from one temporary shelter to another. There was no stability, no peace. Every sound in the night, every unfamiliar face, became a source of fear. They were not simply avoiding disapproval, they were running from those who believed their deaths would restore honor. Yet, through it all, their bond remained strong. Their love, forged in fear and tested by exile, never wavered. They shared moments of laughter, of quiet understanding, fleeting glimpses of normalcy in a life shadowed by threat. Their relationship was deeply human, tender, and filled with silent promises they knew they might never fulfill. This was not a political drama or cultural conflict alone. It was a love story, torn apart by a society that refused to accept it. In a place where love was treated like a crime, Sheetal and Zarek's connection stood as a quiet resistance. A reminder that behind every tragedy lies a deeply personal truth and a love that never asked to be punished. After months of living in fear, constantly on the move, Sheetal and Zarek received a message that seemed to offer relief. Word came from their tribe. They had been forgiven. A jirga was to be held, a meeting of elders where the past would be set aside and peace restored. For Zarek, the news brought hope. He saw a chance for reconciliation, a path back to the family that had turned its back on him. He believed in the gesture, in the possibility that time and reflection had softened hearts. But Sheetal remained wary. Her instincts told her that such forgiveness did not come without cost. She questioned the sudden shift in tone, the unexpected offer of peace from those who had once demanded their punishment. Still, out of loyalty to Zarek and a deep yearning for resolution, she agreed to attend. The meeting was set in a remote, deserted area, far from the village, far from witnesses. It was presented as neutral ground, but it was never meant to be neutral. It was a trap, carefully arranged under the guise of tradition. The jirga, in this case, was not a council of wisdom. It was a council of executioners. The very men who once cradled Sheetal as a child, who had shared meals and family celebrations, now stood in silence with rifles in their hands. Forgiveness had never been offered. It had been fabricated to lure them into a false sense of safety. This betrayal, delivered not by strangers but by kin, made the crime all the more devastating. It exposed how tradition, when manipulated, can become a tool for vengeance. In this system, honor was not restored through dialogue, it was enforced through death. The elders did not mediate, they decided. And their decision had already been made long before the couple arrived. Under the burning Balochistan sun, Sheetal and Zarek arrived at the designated spot. The promise of a jirga had brought them here, but the truth stood before them. 19 men, silent and still, 5 of them holding rifles. There were no elders seated in discussion, no sign of negotiation. The air was thick with heat, dust, and something far more chilling, finality. The earth was dry, cracked underfoot. The silence was unnatural, like a breath being held before an act that could never be undone. Among the men stood cousins, uncles, neighbors, people they once trusted, now transformed into executioners. There were no accusations, no questions. Just quiet judgment and the hum of weapons ready to fire. Zarek asked, "Where's the jirga?" His voice trembled, not with fear but confusion. One of the elders stepped forward. "It's already decided." Sheetal stepped ahead. She clutched the Quran in her hands, her mother's shawl draped over her shoulders. Her eyes did not plead, they held resolve. With a calm, unwavering voice, she said, "You are only permitted to shoot." It was not a surrender. It was a statement of truth, spoken with the dignity of someone who knew her fate had been sealed long ago. 9 bullets followed. Her body collapsed. The Quran slipped from her hands and landed softly on the dust, now stained with blood. The book remained untouched, a symbol of mercy in a place void of it. Then came Zarek's turn. They shot him more times than they had her, as if his choice to love was a crime of even greater defiance. His body fell beside hers. When it was over, the men turned away. No remorse, no words, just footsteps fading into the distance. The field, once empty and sunlit, had become a quiet grave of conscience. Weeks after Sheetal and Zarek were executed, a video surfaced online. Shaky and grainy, it captured the final moments of their lives. The footage, likely recorded by one of the 19 men present, spread across social media with terrifying speed. The camera did not flinch. It followed the couple as they arrived, stood still during the silence, and recorded the gunfire. No effort was made to hide the act. There was no shame. Whether the video was intended as evidence or as a warning is still unknown. But its existence transformed a local crime into an international outcry. Across platforms, people watched in horror. Outrage grew. Condemnations poured in. Viewers expressed sorrow, disbelief, and rage. The story of Sheetal and Zarek went viral, shared, reposted, and debated. For a moment, the world paid attention. But in the village where it all happened, nothing changed. No arrests were made. No officials arrived. The police did not intervene. The killers walked free, untouched by law. The silence from authorities was not just troubling, it was absolute. In Balochistan's tribal belts, where the Jirga's word holds greater weight than legal statutes, justice remained absent. The video became more than just a record of the crime. It became a symbol. A symbol of the divide between digital awareness and on-the-ground reality. Online, there was noise. On-site, there was silence. The global reaction lasted days. The local inaction persisted indefinitely. For the millions who viewed the footage, it was a call to conscience. For Sheetal and Zarek, it was too late. The video stands as both testimony and indictment. It revealed the truth, but it also highlighted the impunity. A broadcast of murder, and of the world's inability to stop it. In the aftermath of Sheetal and Zarek's murder, a divisive conversation emerged, one that tried to mask violence as culture. Some justified the killings as honor, defending them as part of long-standing tribal traditions. Others deflected, saying, it's their way of life. But this section confronts that narrative directly. This was not culture, it was cruelty. Sheetal did not commit a crime. She chose to love. She chose to live freely. But in a society where a woman's will is seen as rebellion, her choice was branded dishonor. Her death, however, was not an act of cultural preservation. It was a display of cowardice, misogyny, and brutal control disguised as tradition. These were not ancient customs. They were deliberate, modern acts of violence aimed at silencing a woman who dared to live her truth. This section challenges the tendency to excuse such killings as norms. It asks, what kind of society teaches fathers that honor lies in surrendering their daughters to execution? What justice system allows murderers to pose as guardians of morality? And why are women always the ones asked to uphold this so-called honor, while men act as judge, jury, and executioner? The silence from those in power, political leaders, religious clerics, and extended families, speaks volumes. Their absence is not neutrality, it is complicity. Sheetal's murder was not just a family decision. It was permitted by a structure that failed her entirely. A structure where tribal pride outweighs human life, and where religion is misused to justify violence instead of prevent it. This was a ritual, not of culture, but of silencing. A system designed to crush independence and bury voices. The responsibility does not end with the men who pulled the trigger. It extends to every silent witness, every authority that looked away, and every person who chose comfort over conscience. Culture did not kill Sheetal. Cruelty did. Sheetal did not live to see justice. But in death, she became more than a victim. She became a symbol. Her final walk, wrapped in her mother's shawl and holding the Quran close, was not a surrender. It was a declaration. She faced her killers not with tears, but with strength. Her silence was not weakness, it was resistance. The place where she fell is now overgrown with weeds. Nature tries to move on, but we cannot. Sheetal's legacy lives in the questions she left behind, in the echo of her footsteps, in the fall of the holy book from her hands, in the eyes of every woman still afraid to love freely. She represents not just herself, but countless others still running, still hiding, still pleading for the right to choose their own lives. Her story exposed a system that punishes love and rewards silence. Her courage, however brief, became a light in the darkness, a challenge to every voice that said, she should have known better. This documentary does not end with suspense or vengeance. It ends with remembrance, a demand not to let her name fade into statistics. To remember Sheetal not as just another daughter lost to so-called honor, but as a voice, one that dared to speak through her actions even when words were no longer safe. Her murder may have silenced her, but her memory speaks louder than ever. And in that memory lies responsibility. To change the systems that failed her, to question the beliefs that condemned her, and to ensure that no other woman has to take her final walk in silence again. Sheetal asked for only one thing, the right to love. And she gave everything in return. Her legacy is not buried. It lives on,